featuring Kathy Collins and Matt Glover, who are going to be talking about nurturing early childhood readers. Before I move on, I want to remind you all to live tweet along with Kathy and Matt at hashtag the EdCollab Gathering space #4. And if you, I think I'm pointing right, if you can see it right below my name, it's right there for you all. As a reminder, you have to have that space after the EdCollab Gathering space #4. Just make sure to have that. When Chris asked me if I would mind introducing these two amazing educators, I didn't hesitate to say yes. Both Kathy and Matt are well-known and loved consultants, authors, and individuals whose works I have used and shared in my career as a literacy consultant. It's also timely because just last week I gave my assistant my book order, and it included Kathy's and Matt's brand new book. It's called I Am Reading, Nurturing Young Children's Meaning-Making and Joyful Engagement with Any Book. It just came out in March. I'm so excited to read this text. I already know from Kathy's and Matt's work that this will be yet another amazing resource. So I can't wait to read that, and I hope you all pick it up as well. Aside from authoring I Am Reading with Matt, Kathy has authored 2 other tremendous texts, Growing Readers and Reading for Real. What I really love about Kathy is that her writing and speaking draw you in ways that make you feel like she is coaching you just one-on-one. Kathy's compassionate manner, her fun nature, and her practical ideas make her an incredible educator, and I really know that you're going to enjoy hearing from her today. I also have no doubts that you are going to enjoy her collaboration today with Matt. Matt is another amazing author of several books, 2 of my favorites actually, including Engaging Young Writers and Already Ready. That one co-authored with Katie Woodray. Matt's style is one that keeps you engaged and always seems to revitalize my thinking about how to support young readers and writers. He really, truly is also a gift as an educator. So, without further ado, I give you Kathy Collins and Matt Glover. Enjoy your session.
Thank you, Dana.
Yeah, what a nice introduction. A lot of pressure now, Kathy, right?
Yeah, all right, Matt. We're on this.
So we've really been looking forward to this opportunity to be able to talk with people today, because we've been thinking about this project for a long time, probably too long, really, longer than we expected. But it's one that we've been particularly excited about because it really gets some issues and some things about young children and about learning that we're particularly passionate about. So just to give you just kind of a quick overview of or quick setup for what this project that we've been thinking about and what we've been talking about over the last couple of years, it really gets at trying to think about how do we support young readers in 2 different ways. One, before they're reading conventionally. So one of the things that Kathy and I firmly believe is that reading development doesn't start when children start decoding. It doesn't start with letter-sound relationships. It doesn't start with being able to decode text. It really starts long before that, when children start doing all sorts of things as they interact with text. And so we've been thinking about how do we support children in reading before they're reading conventionally or before they're decoding. But we also think about this with students for a while, even after they start decoding. Because one of the things that we often find is that once children start reading level text in kindergarten or start reading level text in 1st grade, that even though they may still have a high-interest non-fiction book in their book bag, or other books in their book bag, picture books in their book bag that they can't decode, most teachers would have students have an opportunity to be able to interact with those books. But often there's very little conferring going into those books. It seems what we see most often is that as soon as children make that move into level text, then all of the conferring, all of the teaching goes into those level texts. And so we're thinking about how do we support children in kindergarten and 1st grade, even after they start reading conventionally, but supporting them in a way that supports their thinking as they interact with text that they can't yet decode. Anything you want to add to that, Kathy, just in terms of kind of setting that up?
Yeah, Matt, I think we should tell people our unofficial title, do you think, of our book? Well, so Matt and I, it has been 2 years, and if we're talking publishing deadline, it was a long time, but I think it's been really more than 2 years that we've been working on this. But when we finished our book and named it I Am Reading, behind the scenes, our real title for this book is, and it's a minor curse, but it's I am reading, damn it, because kids are doing so much reading work, so much heavy lifting as thinkers, as meaning makers, before they can read one sight word, before they could read any words in their books. And so Matt and I are hoping that we'll be able to show you ways to honor, support, and encourage this. So should we go to video?
Yeah, so let's just to help us think a little bit about this, we'd just like for people to watch this little clip, just a little portion of this girl, Natasha, reading this book. And what's important about, a couple things to know about this real quickly, is that Natasha's 4, and this is a book that she's never seen before. So this is an unfamiliar book, a book she's never seen. Natasha doesn't, at this point, doesn't have maybe just a couple of words that she would know by sight. She really doesn't have very many letter sound relationships yet in terms of decoding. And so we're going to be just very interested to see what happens when we ask her, would you read this book to us? So let's watch Natasha read this.
All right. So you're going to go first? Okay. All right. There you go.
Do you want to play with me? Play with my doll? Do you want to play with my bunny?
That's so interesting. So you saw the doll and the bunny, and so you think they're talking about playing with each other?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So look, you can read this. You just read that.
Let's have a snack you can have your bunny, and I don't want my doll to get all messy.
You don't want your doll to get all messy?
Yeah.
Yeah, because the doll's not in this page, is she?
Yeah.
But you can still see his bunny there, can't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Let's see. All right. Oh, when are you ready to wait? Are you ready to turn the page?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's not break it.
Let's not break it?
Yeah, because I know that because she's holding that.
Yeah, it's very tall now, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's he doing?
Holding it with that.
Oh, you think he's holding it so it won't fall over?
Yeah. No, put it on the cake.
Are you ready to turn the page?
Up and down, up and down, up and down. It goes up. A boy goes down. A girl goes up. And then we draw pictures when it gets 2 o'clock.
All right, so as we think about Natasha reading that, one of the questions we would generally, if we had a normal kind of workshop session where we could talk to people, we'd say, okay, what are your thoughts? Is Natasha reading, right? Is she a reader? If she's not a reader, what more would she need to do? If she is a reader, what makes her a reader? And of course, when we ask people that question, we get a wide range of answers or thoughts. We'll have people who say, well, no, she's just telling about the picture. She's not really reading. We'll have other people who will say, no, she's reading. She's making meaning from those pictures. Other people say, well, she's kind of a beginning reader. I mean, just all sorts of a whole range of how people will look at what she's really doing. And so Kathy and I think about that a lot and think about the different lenses that we could look at someone like Natasha through. So you want to talk through just a couple of those lenses, Kathy?
Sure, Matt. Just a second. I'm going to get the... Can you see this?
Not yet.
Okay. Hold on. Now is it up?
Share screen.
Okay, hold on for 1 second, everybody. I'm sorry.
Go to presentation mode. Okay.
Oh, goodness.
Share screen.
Okay, sorry, Matt, your face is still there.
Okay.
And now, do you see it?
Yes.
Okay, sorry everybody. So, so when we watch Natasha and other children, we realize that we have a more expansive definition of what it means to read than just decoding, and we humbly present our definition because our definition stands among, you know, Mari Clay, Elizabeth Selsby, neuroscientists. There's a lot of definitions of what it means to read. So with those in mind, and then thinking about ours, that reading is an interaction with a text during which the reader uses a variety of resources within the text, words, pictures, graphic elements, and within themselves, schema, skills, strategies, in order to make meaning. When we think of a reading definition like that, then we realize Natasha is reading. But what happens if we're in a classroom or in a home, this can happen with caregivers, when we look and see a child like Natasha reading, turning the pages and talking about the pictures, there's some typical responses that families and teachers might make. For example, oh, look at, she's so cute, look at her. Or if it's a book that the child is familiar with, oh, she's got it memorized, that's no big deal. I read it to her so much, it doesn't really count. And on the other hand, I read it to her so much, if she couldn't read it, I'd be worried. Or basically a flat out, that's really not reading, because they're not reading the words. But the consequences of these responses is that we're not supporting the child's efforts at making meaning. We're missing opportunities to support and nudge them, and we're undervaluing a process of making meaning. And if we were in a workshop with you where we could interact more easily, we would look at all of the heavy lifting that Natasha is doing in that book, inferring, she's determining importance on the page to decide what to talk about, she's giving the characters dialogue, so she's reading with, there's a dimension of fluency, reading with expression that's present in the reading. So, Matt, is there anything that you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, well, just again looking at what Natasha's doing, there's a little bit more. She gives evidence, right? There's a place where she's saying, "Oh, look, she's building this hive," and she points out, "Here's how I know this," right? She points it out. Since she has never seen this text before, she has to think about this in a pretty different way. She has to really bring a lot of that scheme and background knowledge. In fact, there's a part where the boy she says, "Oh, he's holding the tower up." About half of the children who read that page will say, "Oh, he's holding the tower up." The other half will say, "Oh, he's knocking it down." We always wonder if that's a little insight into individual children, which way they interpret that. But it is bringing that kind of background knowledge and schema into that reading process, that she's making meaning from that text. We just think that the thinking that she's doing as she tries to make meaning there is a pretty high level. She has to do a lot of work since she's never seen this book before.
Okay, so I'll jump back to slides real quick. Am I up with slides? Okay. So when we're sitting beside Natasha or any child who's reading before they're reading conventionally, we've listed out some things you could do in that interaction: nudge, support, encourage, model, discuss, generate language around the text, and play with the child. And those things work in any kind of book that a child will have in their hands before they're reading conventionally. And Matt and I realize, genre aside, authors aside, publishers aside, there's really three kinds of books that a child will be reading. They'll be reading a book that's really familiar with, which Matt and I define as a book that an adult has a caregiver or teacher or sibling, some adult has read to the child at least a few times. An unfamiliar book, which is a book that nobody has ever read aloud to the child before, which was the case for Natasha. And then also informational books, and then both familiar ones, somebody has read to them, and unfamiliar ones. So there's a few ways, a few considerations that we think are really important, important ways we can support kids before they're reading conventionally in these books, these 3 different kinds of reads. One thing we can support is their language use, our conversation with them about the book, their receptive language, and then expressive language, being able to say as much as possible, as specifically as possible, with as much language and syntax as possible. And then also we can support children in helping to develop their independence and agency, and actually we should add another one, their identity as someone who can read anything. Matt, do you want to add into that?
No, just those are really the 2 big ways to do it. And what's interesting, of course, is that someone's independence level doesn't necessarily correspond with where they might be language-wise. So we'll often see children who are pretty sophisticated in what they could say on a particular page, but aren't displaying the level of independence in reading a book like that. We'll also see children who are very independent, but their language level isn't as sophisticated, and any combination of. And what, of course, we're looking for and trying to support children towards being able to do is to be able to read books with a pretty sophisticated language way, and to be very independent. Basically, we want children to, wouldn't matter if we were there or not, right? You kind of get the feeling with Natasha even that we could just walk away right then. She's going to keep reading. She's not just doing that because we've asked her to read to us.
Okay. I'm going to switch back to slides. So we'll talk about the language support, and then we'll talk about ways we can support children like Natasha so that we can walk away and they would continue on reading and enjoying themselves. So when we're sitting beside somebody who's reading a familiar book, an unfamiliar book, here are some ways that we can support them with their language use. We do these things. We elaborate. We provide evidence for anything we say. We explain. We use an expansive vocabulary, and we model enjoyment. But we can also ask that of the child with whom we're reading. We can ask them to say more, or what kind of flower do you think that is? To elaborate, to show where they got an idea. If they say, oh, in Knuffle Bunny, Trixie's so sad, we can say, how do you know she's sad? Can you show me where you know she's sad? We can ask kids to explain. We can support them with expanding their vocabulary, and we can just show them ways that they can be playful with the books that they're reading. And so one of the things Matt and I were thinking about is how children approach familiar books, unfamiliar books, and informational books. And familiar books, a lot of you may be familiar with Elizabeth Sulzby's work. We jumped off of her work to think about this. Now, the difference in what we're doing is, as we understand it, a lot of Elizabeth Sulzby's work was around books that teachers read aloud to kids, and there was a certain kind of way they'd read the books several times and then make the books available to children. But we encounter kids all the time who are reading familiar books in the classroom that the teacher hasn't read to them, maybe a parent or maybe in their after-school program. So there's no controls, and I say control with lowercase, such as, oh, I know I've read this to them 7 times. We don't know how many times they've had it read. The book has been read to. So we're broadening what a familiar book might mean. That's not just the one the teacher has read several times, but it's a book anybody has read to the child several times. And so I was going to say,
Kathy, also just real quick, a couple other things with that. Also, as we think about those familiar books, we're not thinking just familiar storybooks.
Right. Oh, good. Yeah.
The Sulzby books, in which we're not. Really what we're saying is, yeah, we would want to use familiar storybooks, and beyond that, we could also use books that are organized as a list. So, for example, Hello Twins, that Natasha was just reading, is organized as a list, right? It's not a story. But there are some things about that book that make it particularly nice one to use with students. There are lots of things in illustrations that they can notice and will spark that kind of inferring and thinking. There's opportunities to create dialogue. They have a lot of the characteristics that we want, but we're trying not to limit just to classic familiar storybooks, but looking really broadly at any books that children read over and over and that they love when we think about familiar picture books.
Okay, yes, thanks, Matt. And then, so we came up with these levels, which I don't know, how do we say this, Matt? We're afraid to use the word level because we don't want people to sit with 3- and 4-year-olds with a rubric on a clipboard marking levels and, you know, having level labels for kids. We weren't sure if levels is the right word, but we wanted to, as we watched, I don't know, Matt, did we watch 100 kids, hundreds of kids reading? We realized that there were broad stages, levels, again, that word, that ways that kids read, and we sort of calibrated them to give teachers and caregivers ideas of what they might do or say to support the child to just nudge forward a little bit. And so that, let me just go back to the slides real quick.
And just while you're switching back, I think a part of it is what we do know is that the better we can notice and name what children are doing, the better we're able to support them. So we're really looking at these language levels just as a way of being able to describe what we see with children, knowing that they'll move from different level to different level day by day, right? Especially in the nature of 4-year-olds, it takes a while for any of those things to be kind of cemented, that it's very fluid, but there's just a way to be able to start to have some common language around what do we typically see and how can we then start to nudge children forward.
And Matt, didn't we see it several times, even within one book? A child might begin a familiar book like a champ, and if you close your eyes, as Selsby describes it, it almost sounds like the child's reading it to you. Then all of a sudden in the middle of the book, they might revert and just lose some momentum or something. So within one book, within one day, a child could be operating at these different levels, but the being able to name exactly what they're doing helps us think about exactly what we can do to support them. So in general, aside from the specifics of those language levels, some quick things that we think about when we're sitting beside a child reading a familiar book is these things listed on the slide. You're saying we can, I won't go through, maybe I'll just pick one out, and Matt, if you want to pick out or highlight one of them, but we want to support kids about using their schema. Use what you know about the book. If they get glitchy in it, we could say, do you remember this story, how it goes? Do you want to look ahead? We could turn some pages just to refresh our memory about how this story goes. So give them some strategies and to activate their schema. I don't know, Matt, do you want to talk about one of these?
Well, the one that jumps to mind always is just helping students attend to and really build ideas from what they see in the illustrations. And oftentimes, certainly children are using those heavily, but especially sometimes with a familiar book, because they know that book well already, sometimes they can get into kind of this pattern of reading that book more quickly, and slowing down and really looking carefully and noticing new things in the illustrations can support their language as well.
Okay, and then so we went through the same sort of process with unfamiliar books, looking at a bunch of kids reading unfamiliar books and naming what we notice, and thinking about ways we could support kids, nudge them, and so just again, studying the illustrations, and kids will, when they have an unfamiliar book, sometimes immediately they'll say, oh, I don't know this book, I can't read it. And then we could say to them, oh, let me show you how you can know it. Let me, one of the things I do when I pick up a book that I've never read before is I go through and try to get a sense of it, or I go through and see what's going on the pages, and again, studying the illustrations and naming what you see locating if there's a recurring character, if it is a storybook, well, I guess a list book, but that almost letting the character host the book for the child. They just go through and, just that's one example. Matt, is there one on there that you want to?
Well, no, but more than that, I think I just want to make the quick case for children reading unfamiliar books. Again, like we saw with Natasha, the thinking is so different than what they're doing with a familiar book. And I want to be careful because as interested I am in children reading unfamiliar books and the thinking that they have to bring to bear to be able to create meaning in that book, it's not over unfamiliar books. I think they just provide different opportunities. I think there's huge advantage in reading very familiar books. This is what most children do. Most of this work comes from just watching what do children do at home when they're reading those familiar books, those books that we've read to them 100 times at home, right? Those books that we have to hide eventually because we're tired of reading Go Dog Go for the 98th time. But and so I think there's tremendous advantage of those. But there's a different type of thinking that takes place when it's an unfamiliar book. And so as I think we want to make sure that we're supporting language levels and independence in that same way across unfamiliar books. So I just want to put my quick plug in for reading unfamiliar books, which of course is tricky because once you've read it once, it's no longer unfamiliar, right? So it's kind of a one-shot deal with some of those books to be able to, the very first time you read that, to really think through that differently.
Okay, and then we'll just take a quick look at let me get it. Then same thing, informational text, which one thing that we realized, and Nell Duke has some research in one of her books about this, the amount of informational text that children are exposed to and before they go to school is pretty minimal. And then once they're in school, we might have nonfiction book baskets, informational text sets, and near the turtle tank there's some turtle books, but those books are not read aloud a lot to kids. I can't remember, I don't know if you remember, Matt, what Nell said. What is it, 80% of the books read aloud are not informational? I guess don't quote me because I can't remember the exact.
At least that, I think, right.
Something like that. And when you think of it, a young child at home, I was joking with some teachers, the shark book that the child loves to look at by day is not exactly the sweetest bedtime read. You don't want to turn the page to the bloody shark teeth right before they go to bed. So parents might tend not to read those kinds of books as naturally as they would read, more of the storybook or the sweet kind of book. Not all parents, but in many cases that's the case. And then also, if I don't have a slide with a text page from some informational books, but they can seem trickier to navigate. So they're not read aloud a lot in many cases to young kids, but we argue for more exposure and more experiences and more opportunities for children to explore informational books. And
Can I say one thing about that real quick?
Yeah, sure.
So it's we've made this case for informational books in large part just because of what we see when we watch children go to the library and where do they go to check out books, and the fact that half of the class makes a beeline for the informational section and checks out every dinosaur book that they can find. We're not approaching this though from a standpoint of standards or some of those that increase emphasis out in the world for other purposes for students reading informational text. That aside, we think there's huge value in children reading informational text because of the interest in the types of things that they naturally like to read. So we just want to make sure that we put this little disclaimer on there that this is not trying to get children ready for informational reading and Common Core. That's not our goal here. Our goal with informational text is because, exactly what Kathy is saying, we see this discrepancy often between children's interest level in reading informational texts and the amount of informational texts are actually read in classrooms, right? As part of this work that Kathy and I have been doing, we've asked teacher after teacher, how many informational read-alouds do you read at the beginning of the year? And there are very few, right? And here's the other place this comes into play in particular is we have watched a lot of children then read informational books, just like we were watching Natasha a second ago. We'll watch students read informational books. And what's interesting, of course, is if they haven't heard very many informational books, it's much harder for them to read informational books in a way that sounds like an informational book. So we have lots of ways of supporting them in doing that, but it's much easier if they've been hearing a lot of informational books, supports their language levels and being able to read those as well.
Right. Okay. So those are the 3 different kinds of books, and we'll really quickly we'll show you some ideas about supporting kids with their independence and agency and growing a healthy reading identity. So we again, watching hundreds of children, we might begin with kids who say, I can't read, or they frequently appeal to an adult. They won't even, sometimes they hesitate to even turn a page without a prompt to turn the page, right up to kids who almost put their hand up and say, I'm fine, you can go handle something else in the room, because they're so comfortable and so empowered to read any book in the classroom. So ways we can support kids to develop some independence is, one thing Matt and I realized is a simple word. When we sit beside a child and say, can you read this to me? They might say, no, I cannot. But just saying, will you read this to me, or would you read this to me, changes that dynamic. And they might say, I don't know how to read, and then we can say, it's not so point blank, yes or no. But will you read it to me? I don't know. And then we could say, well, let me show you how you might read it to me, and we can model. But will you, just asking them, we don't always ask them, and just simply asking them can get them to read to us. Exposing them to a variety of texts through Read Aloud, and by sitting beside them when they're reading a variety of text, helps them get comfortable in different genre, with different types of story structures, list books, storybooks, and then in any text saying what you learned from the pictures. And then other supports we offer. Matt, do you want to talk about any of these in particular?
Yeah, it's just what I wanted to say, thinking about reading identity, is just what we've noticed time and time again is how quick many children are to say, no, I can't read this, and then how incredibly easy it is for them to start reading. Right? It's usually about 30 seconds. If we just model for a couple of pages and say, let me show you how to look at the pictures and say something about what you're saying, we get children reading incredibly quickly. It doesn't take much at all. There's nothing we do. It's amazingly easy for them to build a reading identity. At the same time, it's incredibly easy for them to lose that reading identity as well. So this level of this issue of independence we see is a really significant one. We want young children to have this identity of themselves as a reader, and we want to foster and support that as they become older. It's just, we often see children, just as easy as it is to create a reading identity, it's just, unfortunately, just as easy to lose it.
Yes. And so I think with the time we have left, should we want to move to the classroom implications?
Sure.
Okay. So Matt will start by talking about how this work might situate itself in preschool classrooms.
Yeah, so there's a couple of big things that we want to be thinking about. One is simply in preschool classrooms, well, let me make this case first. We're not thinking about in a preschool classroom this being a reading workshop structure, right? We're not talking about 4-year-olds having book bags and shopping for books on Monday. The underlying thinking is the same, but the structural differences we think are significant as we're thinking about 3- and 4-year-olds versus kindergarten students. But one of the big things we'd have to be able to do is to have opportunities to sit down next to children and talk and ask them to read to us. It's one thing for children to be reading independently, have a lot of experience reading, but unless we're listening to children read, it's going to be very difficult to nudge them forward. So we have to first be able to look at, have an opportunity to sit down next to a child and listen to them read. And that's fairly easy in a preschool class when we have a center time, a choice time, when we have opportunities where children are engaged in a variety of activities in the classroom, to invite them to come down, sit down, and share a book by reading it to us. And that's really our most powerful opportunity, our most powerful way to be able to nudge them forward, to be able to support their reading. or support their ability to make meaning from a text. We also will do some of that in whole class teaching as well. Again, it's not a daily mini lesson in preschool, but once, twice a week. We have a lot of different purposes for read alouds in our preschool class. Once or twice a week, we would sit down with the class and read a picture book, but instead this time we're going to read an unfamiliar book, right? And they're going to actually help me read that, right? Or I'm going to say, you know what, let me show you something. When we're reading these books that we've been reading over and over, let's think about how we could try to think about what the characters might say. Let's practice, and we'll practice that together. And it's very low key. It's very just natural. It's basically, let's play around with this book, but there's very intentional teaching under the surface there in terms of how to support children in becoming more sophisticated in both their language level. We'll do some of that at a share time later that day where we'll share. And let me show you how Sarah read this book today. Sarah, come and read this to everyone. And so there's that kind of share time as well. And of course, there's always those opportunities for that to take place in various centers throughout the day. But if I think about the biggest ways that we're starting to impact or have most impact on young readers, is that little bit of whole group instruction that's very intentional. We build those kind of opportunities across the year in intentional ways. And even more so, those frequent opportunities to sit down one-on-one with a child and talk with them about what they're, and listen to them read. Do you want to talk about K&1, Kathy?
Kathy, your mic is muted.
Okay, in K1 classrooms where we envisioning more, you know, what people are thinking of a typical reading workshop with whole class instruction, followed by children reading by themselves, teacher conferring, pulling small groups, kids reading with partners in share time. There's whole class modeling daily, and then children go off to read. We're reading aloud a lot and everything as much as possible, along with other balanced literacy components. And so in kindergarten classrooms especially, and for some first grade classrooms, before conventional reading, we are supporting kids and conferring with kids with any book they're reading. And then once children are reading conventionally and once they're shopping for just right books or leveled books, we would still support them in reading anything. So while we'll confer with them in their just right books, of course, if they also have a high interest information book in their baggie, we'll make sure there's time in the day for children to read anything. So we do have, in K1 classrooms there, we grow the time children are spending reading just right books, but we don't want to limit to just right books. If they have other interests and passions, we want to give them time to read books that enable them to pursue those interests and passions. And Matt, do you want to add anything to that?
Nope, you're good. Keep going.
Okay. And so let me just stop the screen share. I don't know. Are there any questions, or did anything come up? I'm trying to read. I can't read that really. Oh yeah.
Carolyn, were there questions then, or?
Yes, there were a couple of questions for Kathy. Kathy, I had one teacher, Kristen, who asked if I can teach a preschool of if I teach a preschool of 4-year-olds, what if I have a couple of children who can't read conventionally?
Oh, who can't or who can?
Who can?
Can read conventionally. Well,
yes.
I think Matt and I would say if they are reading conventionally and there's no reason to withhold support for that, but we wouldn't want to just only support that. We would also want to support them in reading anything and exploring books that they may not be able to read conventionally. Matt?
Yeah, I agree. We're not going to, if they can decode, we certainly want them to become better and better at reading conventionally. At the same time, I also think Kathy and I both want to guard against what we see as this race through text levels, right? And this continual push, and we see it more and more from parents of saying, oh, we've got to get my child reading by level G before they enter kindergarten, kind of thinking. And so with 4-year-olds who are reading level text, we certainly want to support them in that, but I wouldn't want that to be their only reading diet, right? I want them to have other things in their reading lives beyond level text, and I certainly want to be careful that we weren't feeding into the frenzy of let's try to move through text levels as quickly as we can. Kathy and I have a lot of concern about what that starts to communicate to children in terms of what reading really is. It just worries me when I have 4-year-olds telling me that their goal is, as a reader, is to get to the next text level.
And we hear that more and more. You sit down with a child and they'll tell you, we'll say, what do you like to read? And they'll say, I like to read green dot books, which, and they're 4.
Yeah, or the times that we have parents who will say, I only want my kindergartner to check books out of the library that are at their exact right text level, right? And the limits that starts to put on children's reading lives, especially when there's things that they're reading that they're choosing to read for enjoyment outside of school. We'd want them really to have a full range of options in terms of what to read. So it's just always that tricky balance of not wanting to limit what children are able to do, but not wanting conventional level text to be the only thing that they're reading. It's just a tricky balance always.
Yeah. Are there any questions out there in the world?
All right, we have Sarah Parker who's asking Kathy, where can we share information with parents and teachers so we share values of early reading behaviors?
Where can we share? Well, I'm thinking of a couple implications of that question. Where do you mean at parent meetings and workshops? Or what can we share? What kind of info can we share? I'm not quite sure I understand exactly. Matt, are you close reading this differently?
Well, one thing I guess I certainly would think about is, well, we run into this both with reading and with writing, is that parents often think that reading, or they often think writing is just getting words down on the page. So how could we even think about composition until we get words down on the page? We run into the same thing with reading with parents, where, and it's understandable, but where they think, well, until they're decoding, until they have enough letter-sound relationships, how can we begin to work on reading? And so I think it's incumbent on us as teachers to be able to help parents see right from the beginning of the year, preschool, kindergarten, wherever, but right from the beginning of the year, that this is what reading is. We have to explain to parents why we're asking children to read these types of books. We have to explain, and so we need opportunities at parent information nights and our parent newsletter. But more importantly, when we sit down and talk with parents about their children, to be able to say, here's what I see your child doing and reading this type of book. Here's what they're able to do now that they weren't able to do a month or so ago. That we have to be able to help parents see that there is more to reading than decoding, right? That it's comprehension and meaning making that we care about as much or more. And so we have to be able to emphasize that with parents.
Thank you, Matt.
Right, we have Danny who's asking Kathy and Matt, how do we balance teachers who push programs over student choice in reading instruction?
Tell them to stop. No, that's not helpful. Well, there's so much research about the importance of choice and agency, and teachers, I feel for teachers who are in a district or teaching in a place where they have to adhere to a program, sometimes with fidelity. But if teachers can, we can't speak to that, the program or the the imposition of a program. But if teachers can find time every day, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, for kids to free range read, to choose the books they're reading, even if we're having them, if they're reading leveled books, making sure they have a choice in which books they're choosing in their level, in addition to the choice of, free range reading anything in the classroom. I think for teachers who are bound by a program, going off the grid, finding 10, 15 minutes here and there every day where kids can read anything would be helpful, I think. Matt, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just the other thing I was thinking with that is if children aren't having a great deal of choice in terms of what they're reading, it's going to be difficult for us to know what type of readers they are. Right? So one of the things that I would want to know at the end of that first month of school, certainly, is I want to have a very good idea of what type of reader this child is. What type of things do they like to read? Right? Is this child much more of a fiction reader? Is this child much more of an informational reader? What type of things does this child like to read? And of course, if there's not choice, right, and if a program is determining what children are going to read each day, it's going to be very difficult for us to really understand and then support where they are as a reader. Right? So that level of choice is going to be crucial. All right. And then I think we're out of time, right, Kathy, or not?
Yeah, it looks like it. I just want to, I guess on behalf of us, say thank you. Carolyn, thank you so much. Dana,
all right. Hi, thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Matt, for that inspirational talk on reading with young readers. There are lots of great insights and comments on new ways and pushes to push nonfiction reading and other great books into the hands of kids. Thanks again. I do want to tell our viewers that coming up, in session 3, we have a lot more very interesting workshops, so please stay tuned to that. I'm going to share with you really quick a PDF that shows you what is coming up in session 3. All right, so here we go. In session 3, we have, Kathy, can you see this?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. In session 3, we have a workshop presented by Kristen Bronk, Brooke Perry, and Lisa Hollenbach, who will be talking about blogging, and it's called Can You Hear Me Now? Using Blogs to Amplify and Empower Teacher Voice. We also have Sarah Klein and Rosalind Linder talking about better approaches to writing for tests, constructed responses that are helpful and even fun. We also have Laura Fleming talking about digital badging, micro-credential success for teachers. So I do hope you stay tuned for that. And see you in session 3. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.